lead us off?
Hi everyone, we're Group 1 and our case study is on Robert Owen. The focus throughout our presentation will be on the classical school of thought, and this can be separated into two subfields. The first is scientific management, which looks at the productivity of the individual. The second is administrative management, and this concentrates on the productivity of the organisation as a whole. Using the Robert Owen case study and exploring the classical school of thought, we hope to present to you the contributions, but also the limitations of the early theories to productivity and profitability for early industrialists and to modern management. At this point, I would also like to invite you to think about a quote from Lawrence Long. It reads, "Management is the oldest job and the most recent occupation." We found this a particularly interesting insight when studying the theory and the practice of management. Robert Owen was an early management innovator during the Industrial Revolution. He was a key figure within the textiles industry, running mills in both England and New Lanark in Scotland. At the time, mass production was widely used within the factory, and the focus was on the machine. This was seen as a key factor for driving profits. However, Robert Owen recognised the need to take a more humanistic approach to management, and he was one of the first to develop a workforce in which the employees were governed and not managed.
During Owen's period, children were often forced to work from an early age. Labourers would often turn up drunk and act immorally. He initially aimed to improve this by using the silent monitor system, which would use a cube with different coloured sides to monitor the daily improvements of each labourer. He also recognised the need for better treatment and prospects within the workforce. He also worked socially and politically, believing in better education for the working classes, allowing them to gain wider prospects and seeing their worker as a human. These early ideas and experiments influenced theorists of a later generation, such as Maslow and McGregor, as seen here. They also recognised the needs of different employees, focused on the importance of motivation, and created the hierarchy of needs and the theory of X and Y, in which they underlined why people were motivated to work. This is arguably why organisations today have such large human resource departments in which they look out for the employees' needs.
Alright, I'll talk more about the early industrialists and how they contributed to the evolution of management. First to start off with Frank and William Gilbert. They're probably one of the greatest husband and wife teams in science and engineering. And Frank, the husband, he was famous for his time and motion study, and through his study of movement of bricklayers, he came up with a lot of theories for efficiency, and so even improved efficiency in many aspects of life, such as surgery business. Lillian, his wife, she pioneered techniques in management through her work in industrial psychology. Next, Adam Smith, you probably all know him. He's very famous for his ideas on division of labor and also his theory of motivation. Frederick Wilson Taylor, he was probably one of the biggest contributors to management. He was the so-called father of scientific management. And he also, like the other classical theories, wanted to increase productivity of the labor force. And so he came up with a timing method to identify certain movements during a working process which were inefficient and reduce those movements or eliminate them to be more efficient and save time. Henry Gantt, he's and he was famous for his Gantt chart, which is still in use today in a lot of businesses. It's a production schedule showing planned and actual production. And it was a very radical innovation during that time, and it's still very famous today. Max Weber, he was for a more bureaucratic environment in the working place, and so he thought that rules, authority, order, and experience were more important, and especially also the separation between ownership and management. Henry Fayol, he was a manager of a mining company in France, and he focused more on the administrative part of management, definitely, and he stated 14 principles of administrative principles, and he a lot of them are still relevant today, and they were based on his work as a mining manager. Then, last but not least, Mary Parker Follett. She was a very social person. She devoted herself to social work in Boston, where she lived for quite some time. And she was very famous for her ideas on seeking win-win solutions, improving leadership, and also using human diversity advantageously.
Another theorist more widely recognized today is Elton Meyer, who developed a significant theory of hygiene factors. These factors stem from the fact that the motivation is critical in all organizations. Elton Meyer conducted his experiments in the 1920s, and his main objective was to measure how the employee productivity differs under different working conditions. So firstly, he took 6 women from the assembly line and started to change their working conditions through giving them 2 5-minute breaks a day and supplying them with a free hot meal. Then he started to measure their productivity, and interestingly, he noticed that productivity increased after each change. And when the experiment was over, all 6 women were put to the assembly line back and were returned to their normal working scheme. And Elton Meyer recognized that the productivity remained at the same level. So it was the beginning of the theory of team efficiency, and Elton Meyer was the pioneer who thought about the non-monetary motivation. And we can find lots of examples of non-monetary motivation today. In our opinion, the most famous is Googleplex of Google, which is the headquarters of the famous company Google.
It is without doubt that the European of classical school taught of management gave influence to what the right management practices through centuries, but it's also essential not to forget that time passes and things changes. And today's management in the business world is more dynamic than ever before, and developed theories within the industrialism are not so applicable as they used to be, because they're aimed at in operation in mainly stable environment. In addition, nowadays organizations are adopting even more complicated structures, which means that the approach developed by Weber, the bureaucratic approach, is not a good one, because especially within senior management, because this approach focuses the power in the hands of one, and when there is a mistake, this means that it could difficultly be find a reasonable solution, or the problems can be anticipated. Another limitation that used to be advantage of the period of industrialism is strict control and militaristic approach, which nowadays could be regarded as demotivating and stressful, and this approach might also be told as underestimating individual abilities. Furthermore, government intervention and economic forces are more controlling over industries, which have led to less stable environment than that of the Owen's time. This change in social culture, attitude toward business environment, and overall development in technology has caused the classical school thought of management used by Owen be no longer permanently as effective as his times. And nowadays we talk about globalization and innovation in all possible aspects, which means that skills should also be changed.
To summarise and conclude, the classical school of thought has developed and evolutionised management seen today. The principal contributions in which modern management have gained from the study of the classical management perspective are the demonstration of the importance of performance recognition, significance of training and selection of the workforce, using earn as an example of selecting the most productive, specialisation, analysing the workers' jobs and tasks, helping managers using this theory to gain control and direction over the business. However, changes in modern society and business management have created limitations in applying classical management theory to modern situations. A shift in social culture and a way of living, globalisation, innovation of technology, economic forces and political forces have prevented the classical school of management thought from being effective in many modern cases. All in all, through looking back at the evolution of management, we're able to gain a wider perspective. Robert Owen and his fellow
fellow classical pioneers have ultimately formed the basis of management theory, and these have simply adapted to modern management situations, proceeding to progress and advance into the future. As Kate quoted at the beginning of the presentation, management is the oldest job and the most recent occupation. This summarises our presentation. Thank you very much for listening, and do you have any questions?
Okay.